Welcome. This is the Fixer Punk Podcast, the podcast that bridges the divide between personal and social change and seeks to open up the forbidden doors of power to let you in. I'm Grayson Peltier. You can follow me at Grayson Nation, GreysonNation on Twitter, also at Fixer Punk, both on Instagram and TikTok. And the TikTok is very regularly updated with a wide variety of content, whether it be the news or whether it be advice and insights and questions from things I encounter in everyday life in trying to bridge the divide between personal and social change. Before I get into the main lesson that I want to get to today, something pretty stark that relates to a subject that we've discussed quite a bit on the podcast came up in my feed, and I wanted to share it because it outlines the importance of creating a narrative around strength and a narrative around personal development within progressive and leftist spaces as an absolute necessity to protect against far-right, radicalized, alt-right ideologies creeping in and really adversely affecting not just our young people and especially younger men, but the overall political and societal discourse, which if you go on to fixerpunk.com, you look at some of my prior episodes, you read some of my articles, you'll see this is something that I've been very passionate about. And I don't think it gets talked about enough. So now there is a meme Instagram account. I don't even know if I want to tell you the name of the Instagram account because I don't want to give them more publicity than they really should have. But I did tweet about it on my Twitter at Grayson Nation. So what this account does is it basically seeks to compare modern men, which it utilizes very heavily the whole soy boy trope about modern men being very weak, not being very strong, and also about fitness and about how the modern man is out of shape. And that the answer to that is basically the way they put it is lifting weights, eating meat, turning to Jesus Christ, and then building a family. So basically this account seeks to try to promote what it would consider to be traditional masculinity. But you can tell, obviously, from the way that they angle these things, that this is a very political ploy, for sure. But the way they set things up on this Instagram account, where they are basically every single post on here is really a comparing and contrasting between a modern man and what they call an ancient man. And this particular example that started to go viral on Reddit was saying, ancient man has the body of a Greek god, ate meat, beef liver, bone marrow, and sometimes raw eggs, laughs in the face of his enemy, stoic, based, strong, invictus. As opposed to the modern man who is shaped like a modern Greek dad, eats soy and sugar because eating meat is mean, cries when violence happens, emotional, cringe, weak. And then obviously this account, it kind of acts like a typical Instagram or TikTok fitness account in that they start to offer services, ambiguously defined, I guess, fitness training and coaching services. But you can tell the political bias, the far-right bias on this. But it's very appealing because they seem to, they'll even show large houses and people with nice, happy families and saying that that's what their traditional way of life means. And of course, this traditionalism is almost certainly based upon prejudice and acting against inclusion racially and of the LGBTQ community, and going against progressive viewpoints overall. So, if you have somebody who is vulnerable, suggestible, and they specifically angle their content to people who are vulnerable and suggestible, and who are having problems in their lives, by angling it as self-help, because they'll say things like, don't do drugs, don't go into debt, start a family, go to church, telling people to avoid money, women, and power. So, and then of course they say toxic masculinity. They're trying to, of course, they're looks like, from what I can tell, they're saying sloth, lust, and chaos. They're saying, okay, what we're talking about is not toxic masculinity. And they're saying that the things that these straw man arguments that they have about progressives, and you can tell that they're about progressives, because in one of their posts they actually have right here, I'm seeing it, Joe Biden. They're trying to insult Joe Biden as part of like a thing of talking about like the fall of Rome, basically. And they're putting pictures of what looks like a picture that was commonly used to bash Black Lives Matter protests in the chaos square here, but also while giving this advice about fitness, about getting off of addictions and dealing with addictions and dealing with personal struggles. So, and the account right now, this account I'm looking at here has 54,000 followers. So then this is just one of them. I'm confident there are a lot more, and there's probably a lot more that's hidden. It looks like they even have 2 other accounts. But this is the kind of stuff that's going around to young men who may just start out looking at stuff, looking for fitness and self-improvement, but then they wind up with this stuff that gradually seeks to put them through a pipeline to increasing levels of, then to this sort of traditionalism theme, and claiming that that will solve their problems. And then eventually, of course, toward intolerant ideologies and hatred, and not believing in diversity and not treating others as equals in society. So how do we counter this? Of course, the way to do that is to find a counterexample and to say, look, this is not what the left is talking about. We are not telling you to be weak. We are not telling you to not be strong. We are not telling you to live your life in a way that doesn't make you successful. We are not trying to make you weak. We are simply trying to strengthen the whole of society as progressives. And we can show, because here, of course, they show these personal exemplars. They compare and contrast directly, and they do that specifically by showing physiques. They'll specifically show like a statue of David versus statue of a guy who appears overweight. They'll show like a bodybuilder compared to Justin Bieber, things like that. So we've got great examples. Like, if you've listened to this podcast for any amount of time, you know that I am a big fan of the AEW World Champion, still AEW World Champion. Sorry if I spoiled that for you, but I just finished watching the match between Adam Page and Adam Cole. Adam Page, our AEW World Champion. He is a perfect counterexample, and we need more Adam Page progressives to do self-development content and to talk about topics around self-development. And that's why I take seriously, and why I talk about on this podcast, improvements in the areas of fitness, in the areas of finance, in the areas of mental health. Because when you create practical solutions, and I remember being in a campaign strategy class at USC, one of the tactics that would be used, and it wasn't this tactic, this cultural tactic, this long-range cultural stuff. This isn't stuff that is in a campaign strategy class. This is cultural and sociology type stuff. But one of the tactics that was suggested is to specifically target political advertising based upon a lifestyle or an issue that would align with the campaign's priorities. And this is just an extremely long-range extension of that. But you'll see, like, even on this particular Instagram account, they'll show like explain your political ideology, and they show a family on a farm and a guy with a cowboy hat. They seem to express an affinity. They poke at the economic insecurities of young people by showing high rent for like a bunk bed. But then they show with their area of life a large house out in the country with you having a wife and kids. So these young men, obviously, who are discontented about their living situations due to late-stage capitalism, lack of affordable housing, lack of funding for mortgages, all the issues related to affordable housing that are caused by bad policymaking and things that can be solved at a systemic level. They prey on that. But then the example they show of what's good is they show this country family and this cowboy. Well, Adam Page is a serious cowboy who can really, really fight hard, as we saw today on AEW. And he's also very progressive. He donated to Bernie Sanders. He endorses progressive viewpoints. He speaks very, very adamantly about climate change. He decided, instead of having a pickup truck, he decided to get Tesla and put cattle horns on it. Kind of a fun touch. Funny guy. That works. But that gives you a counterexample. And that's the example we want young people to see first. Is, look, I can live these values of trying to make everything better for people around me and advocate to make the world better for those around me, but still have an amazing life, still be amazingly strong. If you want to, you can get as jacked as Adam Page. If you want to, you can train to be a world-class fighter. If you want to, you can have a family. You can have a wife and a kid and a nice house, and still advocate for helping those around you, still be inclusive to people of color, to people who are LGBTQ, people with disabilities. You can still be very inclusive. You can still fight for change and reform in the space of labor, and fight for reforms that will actually solve the underlying problem of why your life is so miserable, why your job is so miserable. Things like unionization to increase wages, things like more affordable housing, publicly owned housing, changes to zoning, and still be incredibly strong and incredibly satisfied in the areas of your own sense of masculinity. That's the example we have to give, and we have to repeat it over and over and over again, just like this account repeats over and over again. Well, the reason why your life is crap is because you're embracing an ideology that allows you to be inclusive to others and to help others. Just go our way and become exclusionary and become a fascist, and everything will be better in your life. No, we have to counter that. And speaking of nice houses, and this is what the actual lesson was really going to be about. I went off on a tangent there. Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation, which is one of the larger organizations of the Black Lives Matter movement, has come under some criticism for the purchase of a $6 million house in the LA area, while they're apparently not accounting for $60 million of funds that the organization received after George Floyd's death. Now, I've spoken about this topic as well, and really what needs to be understood more is that political influence costs a lot of money, but you have to be very, very transparent. As soon as you go out and you say that you're going to be taking money as a 501c3 nonprofit and saying you're going to do one thing, you have to be extremely, extremely transparent about what you're going to do with it from the outset. If it's unrestricted money that you can use for any project that you think that might help advance the cause, then be transparent about that. But you have to say so and not deviate from what that is. So this $6 million house, apparently nobody knew about because it was going to be a safe house, number one, or number two, it was going to be a space for Black influencers and content creators to create content. They wanted to keep it hidden because some of their leadership had been exposed to threats of violence. Some Black Lives Matter leaders apparently had death threats, and they stayed in this property that was somewhat anonymously purchased. And I can kind of understand that. But it's a matter of people knowing what the money is going to be for. When they think that it's going to directly help people who were affected by police violence, or specifically to go to advocacy related to police violence or to services for Black communities that have been adversely affected. I don't entirely remember that everything Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation said they were going to do, but their local chapters, the local Black Lives Matter groups, have been upset about how they've been distributing money. And how they've been managing it. And the state of California had an investigation on this organization. And that's very, very serious stuff. You have to be, as soon as you go and you hold yourself out as an organization like that, you have to be very, very, very careful with your finances. And I'm not saying that spending money on things, and there have been a lot of criticisms of like how they're getting more professionalized and how they're working more with corporate donors, which I don't see as big. I don't really see an issue actually at all with that. If you, again, you're transparent, you're disclosing what you're doing, you can work with a wide variety of people on a particular issue, a particular agenda that can contribute. Maybe those people have some ideological differences, but if you can get them together on a single issue, that's the point of convening and bringing people together to when you're working on policy change. And then there's been criticism about lavish lifestyles of leaders, things like that. But what has to be delineated is the money that's earned by somebody who is doing political professional work, because people who do professional work in the political field deserve the fruit of their labor. They deserve to be paid well. It's difficult work. It's complicated work. But you have to then separate that from organization money that's supposed to go to programs, and what those programs are and what those programs are supposed to be. And you have to educate people on, sometimes people will see lavish or luxury spending in relation to politics, and they'll criticize it a little bit, especially when it comes to grassroots organizations. This is one of the perils of grassroots organizations, is because they want to the people see that and they're like, why are you spending my donations on this? This looks very expensive. This looks very extravagant. And unfortunately, from my experience, luxury does become a necessity in certain cases, and when it comes to political advocacy. When you're trying to get people in power to listen to you, when you're trying to get people in power to donate to you, then you have to spend some money to make some money and to make an impact. You have to sometimes go to a very nice hotel. You have to go to a very nice restaurant. You have to spend that money to get into those spheres, and that benefits the cause. While maybe you're not using that money may have gone to providing direct assistance to people, you're spending it on this. Of course, it's going to make an average person feel off. If they thought that the money was going to go to this, but it's going to this, that's a very, very valid concern. And that's why you have to delineate, okay, this is what's going to be going to advocacy work of this kind versus this is going to be going to assistance of this kind, and make that clear. And I typically like to, if I were to be forming political movements like this, separate funds, separate organizations, so that people who want to give to those things can give to those things, people who don't. But making influence, having cultural and political influence sometimes requires some weird expenses. And that needs to be understood. But even if you have weird expenses, if you have luxurious expenses, you have to be accountable for them. That's the law. It's not just an ethical and responsible thing for a political professional. That is the law. And a lot of larger donors will want to fund things that are a little bit more abstract, and that's an opportunity that should definitely be pursued. As opposed to some maybe individual donors, when they hear about something that's a little bit more abstract, they don't understand it as well. And then it's the job of the professional running the organization to communicate the necessity. Okay, we are going to spend money on this influencer program that requires us to purchase this property, and it is going to help you in this way. That is a skill. And a lot of this just looks like what's happening at Black Lives Matter just feels like it's just incompetence and mistakes all across this, because you could very simply, very easily resolve these problems. And the Black Lives Matter movement is a great thing. It has a great base, has a great foundation. It has a great group of supporters and a lot of cultural momentum, and it's done a lot of good. It's helping to create change, but the organization, the big national organization, is fumbling a lot, which is honestly sad. I think that they'll probably find a way to turn everything around, but right now there's a lot of reputational things, and keeping yourself above reproach is super important, especially in politics, because you have people on the right. Like, the first I heard of this whole scandal of misappropriation of money was on the TV while I was in the gym, because they have two TVs that are on Fox News. So it caught my attention, and then I decided to do some research and found other sources for the story to corroborate it before bringing it here. But your opponents are going to use that. And then, of course, if your supporters also, which many of these local chapters are very upset because they haven't been getting the funding that apparently they were promised. The money hasn't been distributed yet. They're upset too, so that legitimizes the other side's criticisms. So it's not a matter of stopping doing one thing. It's a matter of carefully evaluating what you're doing, using what money, and in what way, and how you're explaining it. Now, I understand the concern about safety with this house that was purchased, making it a safe house for people who have been threatened. I don't know if $6 million is what was needed for that particular purpose. Even if you're buying in the LA area, I don't know how secluded. I'm not an expert in operational security. I'm an expert in, or at least I'd like to believe that I'm an expert in political and advocacy communication. But you have to make sure you have to give the people what they want, but then you also need to find a way to give the leaders, the people who are going to build up a movement, the internal and external leaders, what they need. You need to compensate people well, have good infrastructure, good resources, because on the right, the conservative side, because there's so many business people that are conservatives, and I'm not talking about just huge corporations, I'm talking about little guys or smaller businesses, moderate sized businesses that are conservative. They have a sizable donor base. And I know this because I worked on the right before coming to the left. They have a sizable donor base of people that will contribute to all kinds of passion projects, things that would look kind of frivolous to a normal person, but because these people are business people, they know that this stuff costs a lot of money. Like, somehow, supposedly, the Daily Wire got like $100 million worth in capital to be able to do media production and TV. Streaming services, stuff like that for Ben Shapiro and his colleagues to create conservative content. On the left, if you were to use regular donation money, this kind of controversy does come up. Now, there are some great funders on the left that will definitely fund these kinds of things. and that are actively funding media content creation and ways of building power and building infrastructure. And those are the kinds of people that organizations definitely want to work with and build a good working relationship with, in addition to the general public. And it's a tough balance, but you have to make sure that what the people who are giving money want done is done, whether you're talking about thousands of small donations or whether you're talking about one large grant funder. You have to make sure what they wanted is what they're getting, or as best as possible. And if you fail on that basic point, then you're not going to have a good organization for very long. Even if you have the excellent marketing, if you have excellent operations, if you have excellent infrastructure, if you don't know how to properly manage expectations, and you don't know how to maintain a level of professionalism while also doing what is necessary to relate with and engage your audience, then you're not going to go anywhere. Now, there are also some triumphs. Now, this Black Lives Matter is a grassroots movement. It's a definite 100% full grassroots movement with a few people that I believe that got into leadership, because when you go through a very, very quick rise like that, it's hard to put into place good leadership, and people kind of get randomly appointed who aren't necessarily given the appropriate leadership training, the appropriate skills in political communication, maybe aren't working with the people who have expertise in nonprofit finance. They're not working with the right CPAs, and they're just trying to scale up quickly and trying to respond to the moment. And that's one of the trials of grassroots organizing, is that sometimes when you don't know how to manage these things, you wind up having a lot of people upset. But one of the triumphs of grassroots organizing is how relatable people who are just normal people in everyday life that are looking to make a difference, and people who speak to the people in a positive way that aligns with them, can do. And one great example of that is the Amazon union that was enacted in Staten Island recently. Chris Smalls, the union organizer there, he actually got insulted by Amazon a little bit. They said that he wasn't very articulate or smart. Now, with all I said about professionalism, when you communicate, when you have people out there as leaders of movements, there is sort of this dogmatic adherence in the political field of you have to be super, super professional, super buttoned up, or else people won't respect you. Political consultants get so hung up in the most minute things, and they don't want to go for creative expression. They don't want to go for more significant creative expression. They want people to be kind of sterilized into what they think a politician or a movement leader should look like. And Amazon learned the very, very hard way in losing this election that that's not really necessarily what's going to get you the win. Yes, you need people that are professional and caring and really care and know how to do the details and the fundamentals and the back end work, but the way they communicate doesn't necessarily have to be perfect, doesn't have to be the most polished. To use another wrestling analogy, the baby faces or the heroes in wrestling shows oftentimes aren't the most polished people. They aren't the most intelligent people, but they're the people that the fans cheer for heavily, that are very, very well loved by the fans. And you want people that are loved and respected and that relate to the constituents. And how do you relate to constituents and to everyday people? Well, everyday people have flaws, and people that relate to those flaws but also show strength and courage and leadership, but show that being engaged is something that is accessible to them. People who identify with them on a personal and cultural level is very important, so that they can see themselves as being in power and being capable of influencing and affecting change. Which that's one of the things that we have somebody that's overly professional and everybody involved is overly professional. A person may not see themselves as somebody who is capable of helping to create change, so they won't show up to the ballot box, they won't volunteer, they won't take the extra effort to help the union get into place. They won't call their legislator because they feel like this isn't a space for them. Chris and his organizing team in the Amazon union worked with the racial and ethnic and linguistic diversity of the people at that Amazon warehouse. And these were all just people that spoke the numerous languages of that team. And that really, really makes a difference when you make it seem accessible and you have a very diverse team around you, and you yourself are representative of the flaws and the problems that are caused by the issue that you're working on, because obviously he was one of the workers, so he's affected by the problems that were happening at that Amazon warehouse. So if you have that good storyline around you that puts you in contact with the people, with their fears, with their hopes, with their dreams, with their life, that is when you start to be able to motivate people to do things that are necessary to bring about change. And whether we're talking about creating cultural narratives and creating a narrative around personal development that also helps to empower for systemic change, or whether we're talking about taking action in voting for a union or voting in the midterm elections, which is very, very important. We want those kinds of figures that are willing to share their flaws and willing to talk about a broad variety of subjects, willing to embrace diversity, and willing to be themselves in the process of developing power and collectively helping each other to become better while not concealing who they really are. And that is going to be about it for today's episode of the Fixer Punk podcast. The content and the insights do not end here. Make sure to follow on Instagram and TikTok. I'm trying to update the Instagram more, but TikTok's probably the most updated with tips, advice, opinions, information, and questions for you at FixerPunk. And the Twitter is also pretty well updated at Grayson Nation, GreysonNation. This is Grayson Peltier with the Fixer Punk podcast, and hopefully I will see you again pretty soon. Maybe a Fixing the Fixer Punk episode, but I got to get going. I have to go to the gym so that I can prove that you can care about other people and about changing the world while also changing yourself into being a more jacked version of yourself. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you again soon.